Well, hello there, and welcome to this second lecture video or webinar for the delivery cluster as part of your TAE 40122 Certificate 4 in Training Assessment course with RAM Training Services. Well, again, we are very excited that you've come along and watched this video, and hopefully you got a lot of value out of the first lecture as part of the delivery cluster, where we talked about ways that you can generate ideas for a delivery of a great training session, where we talked about a storyboarding, where we talked about the TOA model, the topic, the outcome, the activity. And we also talked about the purpose of training and what it's all about. And as we remember, it's all about the change that we want to create in our audience. It's all about getting the content in the minds of our audience and making sure that our audience really remember what we teach them and go out and actually use it. All right. And we also talked about the difference between training and education. And we looked at the overall structure that you can use when putting together your session plan or your training plan. And that is super exciting. We highly recommend that you watch lecture one over and over and over and over again to really solidify in those concepts and even that structure so that it becomes second nature in how you deliver. Now, in this section and this lecture, we're going to look at how to build a session plan based on a unit of competency. Now, as part of being a trainer and assessor in the vet sector, many times you are going to be required to design a session plan based on an actual unit of competency. And the majority of training that you do will be tied in some way, shape, or form to a unit of competency as part of a qualification that's part of a training package, as you would remember from the design and cluster lectures that you went through there. Now, what we're going to go through is essentially how do we actually look at a unit and generate a session plan from that. And you're going to find that we're going to draw upon a lot of the concepts that we talked about in the first lecture series on, really developing great structure for our sessions and building in great activities as well. So get ready, make sure you got a notepad ready and a pen ready to write, and let's dive into it, folks. All about how do we actually build a session plan based upon a unit of competency. All right, so let's jump into it. So what will be covered in this webinar, this video? First of all, reminder about the purpose of training. What are we really here to do? Next, where do we find units of competency? You may have forgotten about where we actually go to do that. Next, what parts of a unit of competency we use to build a training session. Next, how to generate ideas for session content and activities that you can use. Next, purposes of a session plan. Why do we have them? And, what are they actually there to do? And last of all, review a completed session plan example so that you've got some reference points and some examples to go from there. All right, so now let's jump into it. What is the ultimate purpose of a training session? Well, as we talked about in the very first lecture for the delivery cluster, it is to create, yes, as we remember, change in the audience, to create change in the audience. And we had the example of the coffee shop. If someone comes to you and wants to learn how to make a cup of coffee, we first need to change their thoughts about a great cup of coffee. We need to help them change their behavior about how to make the cup of coffee. And last of all, ultimately, lives are changed as a result of someone making the better cup of coffee there. All right. So change thoughts, change actions, change lives. All right. And it's not about just, throwing some content together and, hoping for the best and, being super satisfied if you get through all the content in the time frame. No, we want to re-engineer it. We want to create content and activities that are going to drive towards somebody's thoughts changing and their behavior changing. All right. So now, as we've established that foundational principle, let's jump into where do we actually find the old units of competency? Well, as we talked about in the design lecture series, we discovered that there's a website called training.gov.au. And that website you can go to find all the units of competency that are going to be in the vet sector and that are going to be relevant to your industry, your qualification that you may be teaching and delivering and even assessing as well there. All right. So from a unit of competency, what do we actually need to focus our attention on? What do we actually need to train? So in the design cluster webinars, in the lecture series there, we actually brought up a unit and we looked at the different sections of a unit of competency. And we looked at what are the different sections that we need to essentially train. And we talked about there's things called elements, performance criteria, foundation skills, and there's absolutely things from the performance evidence that we can practice doing as well. So if you're looking at a unit and thinking, all right, what do I actually train from it? Well, fundamentally, these are the things that we really want to look at. We want to look at the elements. So typically there's like 3 or 4 elements, or even sometimes 5 or 6 elements in a unit of competency. The performance criteria are going to be the standards or the expectations on how the elements are done. Then the foundation skills are the fundamental reading and writing and, interacting with others and digital literacy skills that someone would need. Then the performance evidence tells us what ultimately somebody is going to be assessed on being able to do. And we're going to look at an example of that in just a moment. But if we're going to build a training or a session plan based on a unit, well, we're going to direct our attention probably predominantly to the performance criteria there. All right, so let's look at an example. So you can go to training.gov.au and you can see the unit in its entirety, but here we have an example. We got the unit BSB OPS 405, organize meetings. And that's a unit that would come from the business services training package. And OPS probably stands for operations, just a guess. And then we've got 405. As we talked about, all these codes and different letters do mean something. And so the 4 probably indicates that it's going to be typically taught, trained, and assessed around a certificate 4 level there. All right. So let's dive into it. If we actually looked at the website, you would see a lot more detail. But for the purpose of this task, I've just captured, or this lecture is just going to capture the performance criteria and the elements. All right. And then we'll take a look at the performance evidence. All right. But we've got this in front of us here. And let's check out what's actually included in the unit. All right. So the elements, we've got prepare meeting documentation and details. Then element 2 is record meeting outcomes. So for example, whatever unit you're going to look at, it's going to have some elements. It's going to have some performance criteria. So let's read through the performance criteria here. Got to identify type and purpose of meeting being organized. Okay. 1.2, identify and comply with legal, ethical, and organizational requirements. Okay. 1.3, make meeting arrangements. Okay. 1.4, prepare notice of meeting. Okay. 1.5, distribute documentation. 1.6, confirm presence of required resources prior to meeting commencement. All right. 2.1, take notes of the meeting. 2.2, outline key decisions and actions. 2.3, review minutes for accuracy and submit for approval. And 2.4, distribute relevant post-meeting materials to attendees within designated timelines. So one way to think about this is if you did each of those performance criteria, that is going to lead to the outcome of organizing meetings, so to speak. All right. So if we were going to train this content, if we were going to build a session plan based on this, well, we would start to think about what are some activities that we could actually put together so that somebody could learn these performance criteria. Okay. So identify type of meeting. Identify and comply with legal and ethical, all right? Make meeting arrangements, prepare notice of meeting, distribute documentation, confirm presence of required resources. Okay, so there's quite a bit there that we could draw upon, and I'm just going to share some ideas that come to mind. And let's brainstorm some ideas together that would cover those criteria. Let's think of some activities that we could actually do, all right? Because in the last lecture video there, we talked a lot about the different kinds of activities that you can do in a training session. We had list activities. We had contrast activities. We had mix and match activities. We had videos. We had role plays, we had simulated tasks, we had research tasks, we had, pair work, we had problem solving and case studies. We had all these different activities that we could use to draw upon to build a training plan or a training session or a session plan, so to speak. All right. So hypothetically, I'm just throwing some ideas out here. If we had these couple of elements and we had these performance criteria, now knowing that depending on how much time you had available and how much you thought was achievable within a certain time frame, you may put together a 15-minute session or a 20-minute session or a 30-minute session or a 40-minute session or even a 1-hour session. And in that time frame, you may be able to get through quite a bit of these things or not so much of these things, depending on a number of factors. For example, how many people are coming to your training session? Where is it being held? What are the expectations there? All right. So essentially, if we looked at this and we just threw some ideas out here, we've got identify type and purpose of meeting being organized. All right. Well, what could you have? You could have a brainstorming activity where students actually listed out all the different reasons why people may attend a meeting. Okay. That'd be great. You could even have a mix and match activity where maybe you've got the 8 reasons for having a meeting, and then maybe you've got different scenarios, and then people match up the purpose and the scenario. All right, that might be quite fun. Okay. 1.2, identify and comply with legal and ethical organization requirements. Okay. Well, maybe you could have a research activity where you had a number of research questions that looked at legal and ethical requirements for meetings, and you put people in pairs and they went off and researched legal and ethical requirements. Or maybe you had a case study and the people read about a particular meeting, and then they had to guess what would be the legal, ethical, and organizational requirements. All right. Or maybe you have a list of a number of scenarios where things went wrong in a meeting, and a student, well, the participants need to identify what legal, ethical, and organizational requirements were not actually met, and what rules did people break. All right, it's another idea. 1.3, make meeting arrangements according to meeting and participant requirements. Well, here you could actually have a case study or a mock scenario where the students need to actually in pairs, they need to organize a meeting, they need to state what the purpose is, where it's going to happen, and they may even need to generate the invite that they're going to send out to other people, and maybe they also need to generate the meeting agenda. All right. And so a part of that is maybe the trainer is going to show some examples of a meeting agenda, what needs to go into one. And you could show some bad, like examples of bad meeting agendas, and students could find the issues or the challenges or the mistakes with the meeting agenda. And then there could be an activity where students rewrite the meeting agenda, and then they create a brand new one according to the case study that they've been provided with. Okay. Then they may need to, as part of the case study, they may need to brainstorm what documentation would be required for the meeting. All right. And then they may need to create a meeting plan and make sure that they make a list of all the documents that are going to be needed to be distributed and when those documents will be distributed as well. All right. 1.6 there, it says confirm presence of required resources prior to meeting commencement. So part of maybe the meeting plan is, what furniture will be required for the meeting. Will it need Wi-Fi? And students could actually create a checklist for the meeting as well. That's another great idea, right? So then we got, so that should pretty much cover element 1 there. So there's so many awesome things that could be done to teach element 1 alone, right? And all I'm doing is just throwing ideas out there as they come to me. And that's pretty much what you'll do as well. Whenever you look at a unit of competency, you will look at, all right, I got my performance criteria here. What are some activities that I could generate that would actually meet, or how do I put it, cover off those criteria there to a point where the students would actually learn how to do those things, right? So number 2 here, it says record meeting outcomes. All right, take notes of the meeting. So maybe in another training session, because you probably couldn't do all of element 1 and element 2 in one training session. It's probably going to be a bit ambitious. So element 2 here says record meeting outcomes. So you could have a show a video of a meeting and get students to practice taking notes. That could work. You could have a mock situation or role play in the class, and you could have 2 or 3 students having a meeting, and then other people could practice taking notes. That would work. 2.2, outline key decisions, actions for implementation. Well, maybe there's a section on how do you handle when there's disagreement within a meeting, all right? And how do you make sure that everybody gets agreement? You know, how do you table topics to come back to it later? All right, so you could have a couple of key phrases that you teach people, and you could have a couple of practice examples that people do. All right. 2.3 says review minutes for accuracy and submit for approval for the nominated person. So you could have a couple of copies of meeting minutes that were taken, and then students could review each other's meeting minutes that they took, and then they could, you know, highlight things that were correct or incorrect, and then have a class discussion and you know, discuss, were the meeting minutes taken accurately, what was missed out. All right, that could be done based on the class scenario, or it could be done based on the videos that are watched or anything like that. And then to distribute relevant post-meeting materials to attendees within designated timeframes. And then as a class discussion, you could have a chat about, you know, who would you need to distribute these meeting minutes to, and how would you do that, and what are the timeframes around that there. All right. So that is how you could handle, or how you could put together an amazing training session for element number 2 there, record meeting outcomes. So what have we done, folks? We've, you know, created some list activities. We've included some videos. We've included some simulated tasks, and we've really brought the content to life, so to speak. All right. It's not about just putting together PowerPoint, 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 PowerPoint. It's not about that, folks. It's about how do we make the session really come alive? And this is whether it is, you know, face-to-face or online, the principles still say the same. All right. So now, what are some other things that we can actually draw upon to build our session? Well, we can also look at the performance evidence and the knowledge evidence, because ultimately the performance evidence is what somebody is going to be assessed to be able to do. So here we can see that candidate must demonstrate the ability to complete the task, outline the elements, performance criteria, and foundation skills. It's going to be the same for every single unit, folks. And including the evidence of the ability to organize business meetings, prepare an agenda, and take notes on at least 2 occasions. So one way to think about training is essentially you are preparing people or training them so that when they come to their assessments, they will be able to do those things. All right. So it would make sense if, as part of the training session or part of building the session plan, you actually kept this in mind, and maybe you included a couple of practice activities where they prepared some agendas, or where they took notes on, you know, a couple of occasions of practice doing that, because as part of their assessment, that's got what they're going to be required to do. Okay. Now we've also got the knowledge evidence, and here it's going to tell us what knowledge somebody needs in order to be able to complete the unit. So for this unit, organized business meetings, we've got, they need to know how to do relevant communication techniques, or what they are. Common formats for agendas and minutes. All right. Organizational policies and procedures relating to facilitation of meetings include meeting quorums, required notice periods, and meeting resolutions and storage of minutes. All right. Well, all of those things you probably want to include in your training session as well, and at least touch upon them to make sure that when they come to do their short answer questions or their assessment, they are clued up and they know how to answer those questions, so to speak. All right. So hopefully this is starting to make sense. All right. So, you know what, you want to train the performance criteria, and you want to, you know, generate activities that then cover that off. And you also, in some way, shape, or form, want to build in some practice activities for the performance evidence and making sure that you are teaching the knowledge evidence through the program as well, there, because that's what they're going to be assessed on, right? So now let's look at, we've already brainstormed those ideas together, and hopefully that's made sense there for you. All right. So now let's look at session plans. Why do we have them? I mean, many people may think they're an annoyance and people get tired of writing them, but at the end of the day, essentially, a session plan creates consistency. All right. And what we mean by this is hypothetically, if you create a session plan, but you are not the person that's able to deliver it for any reason at all, somebody may need to step in and deliver the training. All right. And you need to be able to show how are you covering off each of the items from the unit. What activities are you doing? And how are you making sure that if it's not you that trains it, can someone else deliver it in a similar fashion, if not exactly the same? All right. Number two is have all necessary information recorded so that you don't forget anything. What we mean by this is if you're setting up a scenario, maybe there's particular instructions you need to tell the learners. Maybe you're showing a particular video and maybe you have to have the link for the video. All right. Or maybe you need some handouts. All right. So you don't forget to write in, give handout and at a particular time. Right. Number three is get your timing right. Very, very important to make a note of how long you think things will go for, or how long the session should go for. Is it a 15-minute session, 20-minute, 30-minute, 1 hour, 40-minute, whatever it may be? You have to indicate that time frame, because if you go over time, that's an issue. If you go under time, that's an issue as well. All right. So we need session plans and they need to be as clear as possible so anyone can deliver your session as consistently as possible. All right. So let's look at an example session plan. All right. Now, when you go to various RTOs, you're going to come across various session plan templates, and that's okay. Everyone does it slightly differently, but back in lecture series 1 or delivery cluster lecture 1, we looked at some of the key items that have to be included in your session. So we looked at, the sound check, the greet, the acknowledge, the hook, the trainer self intro, the icebreaker, the agenda, all those fun, fancy things there. So they have to be in there. And you want to make sure that you include those in the session plan as well. If you're going to do an icebreaker, make a note. What's the icebreaker going to be? If you're going to show a video, write the name of the video so that when you come back, look at the session plan, what video are you showing? Don't just write video. All right. It's just courtesy to anyone else that may look at your session plan there. All right. So now let's take a look at an example that you may come across at RAM Training Services, right? So basically here, the first section here, we got session name, learning outcomes. Oh, we touched on that one in lecture 1. By the end of the session, you will be able to. All right. We've got trainer assessor. Maybe they're the same person. RTO organization approval. All right. It may be on the form. It may not. Okay. Constraints identified or assessed. Group characteristics, needs. Special needs student, WHS and TGA reference there. All right. Then duration of plan session, maybe it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, and all of that. And then we got a place for the content, and then resources required, and notes, and then assessment. All right. Then last of all, that would carry on. And then last of all, you got student feedback form, and feedback form there. So now let's take a look at an example of a session plan filled out with all of these pieces in place. All right. So we've got this example from a different unit, and it is an example that you may see in your workbook, or it's just an example. All right. So we've got the trainer name, Ronald McDonald. It's out there delivering training and assessing as well. Not just making hamburgers. So we got Constraints is the venue is having a fire drill at midday. Okay, great to know. Group characteristics, mixed gender, different trade backgrounds, all of that. Now let's come back to the learning outcome for just a moment. At the conclusion of the session, you will have the skills and knowledge to remove and replace wheel and tire assemblies. All right, prepare to remove and replace wheel and tire assemblies. Awesome. Special needs students may Mary injured her leg and is on crutches. She needs to be positioned considering ease of access there. All right, great. And duration of plan, 40 minutes. Fantastic. All right. So then checking it out, we've got the time on the side there, a bit of broad scope, which is great. So we've got 5 to 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? And we got the welcome, we got the housekeeping, overview, learning outcomes, and then brainstorm, changing a tire, and then using brainstorm, rate response, using color legend, resources required, notes. All right. Really great quality detail here. And essentially, you would drop in, if you're going to do a video, you would drop in the video link, right? And if you were going to do a role play, well, then you would have some details about what is the outcome of the role play. All right. And all of these details included, and just gives a bit of a roadmap as to what's going to be covered, how it's going to be covered, and all of those different things. Now, all right, cool. So then carrying on, we've got a bit of a group activity, practical. We've got a changing the tire. And could be some practice time there, and you could have, I think there's a bit of a case study or a scenario in there, or the students could actually practice changing the tire. The trainer gives feedback and observation checklists all filled out there for you. All right. Now, one thing that you may want to keep in mind as you are building a session plan or as you are going through this process here, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, a great strategy to actually do is potentially build your PowerPoints first. Yes, I said it, folks. So if you are going to build a session plan, one of the simplest and easiest ways to do it is build your PowerPoints first. So, slide 1, welcome slide, slide 2, slide is all these different slides that you can build, and you can do a little bit of creative thinking as you build your slides. All right. Then once you have got your slides in action, then you can come over here and build your session plan from there. Sometimes people find that a little bit easier. And what we recommend is go back to lecture 1, check out the different types of activities that you've got available, and start to build your PowerPoints. And the cool thing with PowerPoints is that you can move these slides around, and you can, change your mind as you're building it as well. Then come to your session plan and you can write it all out, right? And the other thing is, you may create a slide that says activity 1 and actually describe the activity on the slide. And that way you've got a note of what the activity is. And then you can come and, build the session plan. Then you can go back and change the slide if you want to do that as well then. Okay. So that can be another strategy. All right. And with PowerPoint, you can even drop in your notes about what you're going to say into the notes section. And then you can come back into the session planning and drop in some more notes as well. All right. So it's just another approach, but just coming back in an RTO, you are typically going to have a blank session plan. All right. And it can start out looking like this. And there's a place for the content and a place for this. All right. And basically, session plans, fantastic. And they are a document that will show you the purpose of the session and what has to happen when. But sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to map it all out first and then build your PowerPoints. What can be easy to do is just build the PowerPoints first and then come back to the session plan and write it all out. All right. And for example, as I said, you can have a slide that says welcome. You can have a slide that says housekeeping. You can have a slide that says learning outcome. You can have a slide that says brainstorm. You can have a slide that says XYZ, XYZ. And, when you're going to use the whiteboard, what do? You just turn off the PowerPoint and you just switch over to the whiteboard. Okay. So, using PowerPoint to generate your slides first can be a quick and easy way to build it, to get your ideas out there, build the session plan, and then go back and you can refine the PowerPoints as you're going through it there. All right. But I just wanted to share that idea with you because we often find that that is a great, simple way to get your ideas out there. In the last lecture, we did talk about the idea of storyboarding, and you can certainly do that as well. All right. So now that we've sort of gone through a unit of competency and the different activities that we can generate, let's look at our quiz for today's lecture. Number one, what is the name of the website we go to find a unit of competency? Let's see if you remember. Number two, what do we do if we can't find a unit of competency on training.gov.au? Number three, what areas of a unit of competency do we look at for training content? And number four, why do we use a session plan? Okay, now, coming back to number two there, what do we do if we can't find a unit of competency on training.gov.au? Well, earlier in the design lecture series, we actually talked about a Google hack, and we actually talked about the fact that you can actually go to Google and type in any random keyword that you want, and then type in training.gov.au. So you could type in, for example, truck. So into Google, truck, T-R-U-C-K, truck, training.gov.au, push enter, and you would find a unit of competency or a qualification on trucks and trucking, right? If you want to find something on cocktails, you could type in cocktails, training.gov.au, push enter into Google and see what comes up. All right. So essentially, if you're going to try and find a unit, one of the fastest ways to do it is just think of a keyword that relates to your industry, drop it into Google with the phrase training.gov.au and drop an enter, and you'll be good to go there. All right. So let's pause and think about the other questions there. What's the name of the website? What areas of a unit? Why do we use a session plan? All right, pause and think, folks, and pause the video there. Let's check out our answers. All right, so what's the name of the website we go to find a unit of competency? Training.gov.au, www.training.gov.au. Number two, what do we do if we can't find a unit of competency on training.gov.au? Well, Google it. So put in the keyword and then training.gov.au. Number three, what areas of a unit of competency do we look at for training content? Well, typically it's the elements and performance criteria, and you may want to have some practice items with the performance evidence as well. All right. Number four, why do we use a session plan? Absolutely for consistency, for recording details, and getting timing right. All right. And the more detailed the session plan, the higher the probability that everybody that uses the session plan will follow it and do it in the required way. Because at the end of the day, the session plan needs to align to the unit, and you need to be able to show to an auditor how you are covering every single one of the items from the unit. All right. So it's really, really, really important that you can document that and show that clearly. All right. Awesome, folks. So that is the end of this second lecture in this series of helping you become the very best trainer, presenter that you truly can be, and really giving you some new ideas and new perspectives on how you can approach training delivery and presentations. All right. And if you can link everything that you do back to a unit, then you are off to a great start. Start to think creatively about activities you can bring into a session to really make the units come alive. All right. And yes, there are times when you can actually cluster units together and teach very similar units together at the same time. You can absolutely do that. And that's something you may come across in the industry as well. But this lecture just showing you how to cover the major items from a unit, the elements, performance criteria, and reminding you that you do want to give them practice time for the performance evidence. So when they get to their assessments, nobody's freaking out there. So on that note, hopefully you got some value from this video, and stay tuned for lecture number 3. Thanks for watching, team.